The discussion around Pakistan export wheat to Bangladesh has to be understood against the hard structural realities of South Asian food economics, not through the lens of political signaling or headline diplomacy. Wheat is not just another tradable commodity in this region. It is a politically sensitive staple tied directly to food security, inflation management, and regime stability. Any claim that Pakistan can meaningfully supply wheat to Bangladesh must therefore be evaluated through productive and production capacity, domestic consumption pressures, stock policy, export control, logistics, and strategic incentives of both the states rather than through aspirational statements. Pakistan is a large wheat producer in absolute terms, but the fact is often misunderstood. Annual production fluctuates around the high 20 million tonnage range depending on weather, input prices, and government procurement incentives. This places Pakistan among the larger wheat producing countries globally, but the production volume alone is a misleading indicator of export capability. Pakistan is also a country of over 240 million people, where wheat is the dominant caloric staple. Per capita wheat consumption is high, and domestic demand absorbs the overwhelming majority of annual output. The structural margin between production and consumption is therefore thin, volatile, and politically dangerous to miscalculate. In years of good harvest, Pakistan may generate a notable surplus on paper, but that surplus is usually absorbed by replenishing government stocks or destabilizing domestic prices rather than being released to international markets. The state plays a decisive role in Pakistan's wheat economy. Procurement prices, stock targets, inter-provincial movement, and import or export are all subject to federal and provincial control. Unlike classic grain exporters such as Russia, Canada, Australia, Pakistan doesn't operate under a liberalized grain trade regime. Wheat exporters are not a market default. They are an exception that requires explicit political authorization. Historically, Pakistan has oscillated between exporting wheat in limited quantities during surplus years and imposing outright export bans during periods of domestic stress. The bias of the system is towards restriction, not openness. This alone should immediately temper expectations about sustained or large scale exports to any external market, including Bangladesh. Bangladesh, on the other hand, occupies the opposite structural position. It is chronically wheat deficient by design. Agroclimatic conditions, cropping patterns, and policy priorities have long favored rice over wheat. Domestic wheat production covers only a fraction of national demand, making Bangladesh structurally dependent on imports. Annual wheat imports routinely reach into the mid single digit million of tons, sourced from wherever price, reliability, and logistics align best. This is not opportunistic importing, it is a permanent feature of Bangladesh's food system. The country's procurement agencies are therefore oriented towards large, predictable suppliers capable of delivering bulk volume consistently, not towards marginal or politically uncertain sources. When these two structures are played side by side, the mismatch becomes obvious. Bangladesh's import requirement is measured in millions of tons per year. Pakistan's realistic exportable surplus, even in favorable years and under permissive policy conditions, is measured at best in the low hundreds of thousands of tons. Even if Pakistan were to divert wheat away from its buffer stock or suppress domestic price stabilization objectives, the volume it could release would still be immaterial relative to Bangladesh's needs. At most, such shipments would function as symbolic supplements, not as structurally meaningful supply lines. This is where the political narrative begins to diverge from economic reality. Statements about Pakistan exporting wheat to Bangladesh often emerge during periods of diplomatic thaw or regional realignment. They serve as signaling functions, demonstrating goodwill, projecting economic engagement, or countering narratives of isolation. However, signaling should not be confused with execution. Grain trade, particularly wheat trade, is politically sensitive in politically sensitive economies, leaves a dense paper trail in tender documents. Shipping manifests, port records, and international trade databases. As of now, there is no credible evidence of large contracted or executed wheat shipments from Pakistan to Bangladesh that would indicate a substantive shift in regional grain flows. It is important to distinguish between theoretical capability and operational feasibility. In theory, Pakistan could export wheat to Bangladesh. The two countries have maritime connectivity, compatible grain standards, and a history of limited agricultural trade. In practice, feasibility collapses under domestic constraints. Any sustained wheat export program could expose the Pakistani government to internal risks and political exploitation by opposing parties. Given Pakistan's recurring inflationary episodes and fiscal stress, voluntarily adding food price volatility is irrational unless there is overwhelming surplus and political cover, neither of which currently exists. There is also a strategic substitution problem. Bangladesh is not choosing between Pakistan and no wheat. It is choosing between Pakistan and a deep, liquid, global wheat market. Suppliers from the Black Sea region, North America, Australia offer scale, reliability, and pricing benchmark that Pakistan cannot match. Even if Pakistan offered wheat at a marginal discount, the risk premium associated with policy reversals and supply disruptions would likely negate any price advantage. Bangladesh's food security planners are acutely aware that dependence on politically constrained suppliers increase vulnerability, not resilience. From Pakistan's perspective, exporting wheat to Bangladesh is economically unattractive beyond symbolic quantities. Pakistan has historically struggled with post-harvest losses, storage inefficiencies, and fiscal costs associated with procurement and subsidies. Exporting wheat at international prices often means crystallizing losses for the state rather than generating profit, especially when procurement prices are set above global benchmarks to support farmers. Unless global prices spike dramatically or domestic procurement costs fall sharply, wheat exporters are more likely to worsen fiscal balances than improve them. This brings us to the core question. Is the idea of Pakistan exporting wheat to Bangladesh a reality or a political gimmick? The answer is that it exists in a narrow band between the two, but far closer to political theater than economic substance. Small, one-off shipments are conceivable under special arrangement, possibly framed as government-to-government cooperation or humanitarian support. Such shipments would generate headlines and diplomatic optics, while remaining economically insignificant. What is not credible is the notion that Pakistan can emerge as a meaningful or sustained wheat supplier to Bangladesh in the foreseeable future. The broader implication is that South Asian food trade narratives often exaggerate bilateral potential while ignoring structural asymmetries. Food security in the region is managed through redundancy, diversification, and scale, not through sentiment or historical ties. Bangladesh will continue to source wheat from global markets that offer volume certainty and price stability. Pakistan will continue to prioritize domestic stability over export ambitions in wheat. Any deviation from this pattern would require structural reform, sustained production surpluses, and any political risk tolerance that Pakistan has not historically demonstrated yet. In conclusion, the claim that Pakistan is likely to export wheat to Bangladesh should be interpreted cautiously and contextually. It is not false in the narrow sense, but some wheat could theoretically be shaped. It is misleading in the broader sense if it implies a meaningful reconfiguration of Bangladesh's wheat import strategy or a new export rule for Pakistan. The hard constraints of production, consumption, policy control, and political risks dominate this equation. Until those constraints change materially, Pakistan to Bangladesh wheat exports will remain marginal, episodic, and primarily symbolic rather than transformative.